justification it gets from our being mistreated. So there's a peculiar irony to being in the box. However bitterly I complain about someone's poor behavior toward me and about the trouble it causes me, I also find it strangely delicious. It's my proof that others are as blameworthy as I've claimed them to be, and that I'm as innocent as I claim myself to be. The behavior I complain about is the very behavior that justifies me. Bud placed both hands on the table and leaned toward me. So simply by being in the box, he said slowly and earnestly, I provoke in others the very behavior I say I hate in them, and they then provoke in me the very behavior they say they hate in me. Bud turned and added another sentence to the principles about self-betrayal. Self-betrayal. 1. An act contrary to what I feel I should do for another is called an act of self-betrayal. 2. When I betray myself, I begin to see the world in a way that justifies my self-betrayal. 3. When I see the world in a self-justifying way, my view of reality becomes distorted. 4. So, when I betray myself, I enter the box. 5. Over time, certain boxes become characteristic of me, and I carry them with me. 6. By being in the box, I provoke others to be in the box. And 7. In the box, we invite mutual mistreatment and obtain mutual justification. We collude in giving each other reason to stay in the box. Once in the box, Bud said, backing away from the board, we give each other reason to stay in the box. We do this not only by mistreating the other person directly, by the way, but also how we might begin to talk about or gossip about that person with others. The more people we can find to agree with our side of the story, the more justified we'll feel in believing that side of the story. I might recruit my spouse to join with me in blaming my son, for example. Or I might gossip about others in order to gather allies at work in my collusion against another person or department, and so on. Whether at home or at work, boxes want to spread in order to gather additional justification. And with every mistreatment, direct and indirect, we give each other further justification for staying in the box. That's the grim reality. I slumped in my chair, suddenly aching for my boy. Now look, Tom, Bud said, sitting back down. Think about how self-betrayal and everything we've been talking about explains the self-deception problem, the problem of being unable to see that I have a problem. To begin with, when I'm in the box, who do I think has a problem? Others. But when I'm in the box, who in fact has the problem? You do, I answered. But what does my box provoke in others? He asked. It provokes them to behave badly toward you. Yes, in other words, my box provokes problems in others. It provokes what I take as proof that I'm not the one with the problem. Yeah, that's right, I agreed. So what will I do if anyone tries to correct the problem they see in me? You'll resist them. Exactly, he said. When having a problem, I don't think I have one. I think others are responsible. He paused for a moment and then said, So here's the question. So what? So what? I repeated to myself. What do you mean, so what? I mean just that, Bud answered. Why should we care about any of this at Zagram? What does it have to do with work? Chapter 15. Box Focus. It has everything to do with work, I said, surprised by the strength of my opinion. How? Bud asked. How? I replied. Bud waited for an answer. Well, to begin with, I said, nearly everyone at work is in the box, as near as I can tell. At least nearly everyone at Tetrix was. So what? So what? I repeated in surprise. Yeah, so what? He said. Well, if we're in the box, we'll be inviting others to be in the box too, and we'll end up with all kinds of conflict that gets in the way of what we're trying to do. Which is what? Bud asked. I hesitated, unsure of what Bud meant. You just said that all this conflict would get in the way of what we're trying to do, Bud continued. So my question is, what are we trying to do? Trying to be productive, I suppose. Ah, Bud said, as though he had finally found what he was looking for. So the box gets in the way of our achieving results? Yes, I agreed. Let's think about how it does that, he said. There are actually two main reasons why the box undercuts results. The first is what Kate has just taught us. When we're in the box, what motivates us most is the need for justification. And what will bring us justification is very often at odds with what's best for the organization. Does that make sense? I nodded, thinking as I did so that this was true, whether the organization was a company or a family. Here at Zagram, we use the term what focus to describe whatever a person is focused on achieving. Out of the box, my what focus at work is results. In the box, by contrast, my what focus is justification. That's the first reason why the box always undercuts results. That makes sense. What's the second reason? I asked. It has to do with my who focus when I'm in the box, Bud answered. You're focused on yourself when you're in the box, aren't you? I said. Exactly, Tom. And as long as I'm focused on myself, I can't fully focus either on results or on the people to whom I am to be delivering those results. In fact, if you think about it, many of the people typically described as being results-focused are anything but that. In the box, they value results primarily for the purpose of creating or sustaining their own stellar reputations. Their who focus is themselves. And you can tell because they generally don't feel that other people's results are as important as their own. Think about it. Most people aren't nearly as happy when other people in the organization succeed as well as when they themselves do. So they run all over people trying to get only their own results, with devastating effects. They might beat their chest and preach focusing on results, but it's a lie. In the box, they, like everyone else, are just focused on themselves. But in the box, they, like everyone else, can't see it. It's even worse than that, Kate added, because remember, in the box, we provoke others to get in the box, both with us and against us. We and our allies withhold information, for example, which gives others reasons to do the same. We try to control others, which provokes the very resistance that we feel the need to control all the more. We withhold resources from others, who then feel the need to protect resources from us. We blame others for dragging their feet, and in so doing give them reason to feel justified in dragging their feet all the more, and so on. And through it all, we think that all our problems would be solved if Jack wouldn't do this, or if Linda wouldn't do that, or if XYZ department would just straighten up, or if the company would just get a clue. But it's a lie. It's a lie even if Jack, Linda, XYZ department, and the company need to improve, which they surely do. Because when I'm blaming them, I'm not doing it because they need to improve. I'm blaming them because their shortcomings justify my failure to improve. So, she continued, one person in an organization, by being in the box and failing to focus on results, provokes his or her co-workers to fail to focus on results as well. Collusion spreads far and wide, and the result is that co-workers position themselves against co-workers, work groups against work groups, departments against departments. People who came together to help an organization succeed actually end up delighting in each other's failures and resenting each other's successes. That's really crazy, I said in amazement. But I see what you're talking about all the time. Tetrax was full of those kinds of situations. Yeah, think about it, Bud said. When were you most happy? When Chuck Stolley succeeded or when he failed? The question caught me off guard. I admit that I'd seen this in others all the time. Stolley really was a problem. I wasn't just making that up. And he created all kinds of trouble, conflict, poor teamwork, and so on. I don't know, I offered weakly. Well, you might think about it a little. When dealing with germs, the mere fact that someone else is sick doesn't mean that I'm not sick. In fact, when I'm surrounded by sick people, chances are greater that I'll get sick myself. He paused and looked at me for a moment. Remember Semmelweis? I nodded. The doctor who discovered the cause of the high mortality rate in the maternity ward. Yes, in his case, it was the doctors themselves, the people who focused on the sicknesses, the problems of others, that spread the disease. As a result, childbed fever, with its various symptoms, spread unchecked, claiming victim after victim, all because of a single germ no one knew about, most especially those who carried it. Bud stood up and moved to the board. What happens in organizations is analogous. Let me show you what I mean. Chapter 16. Box Problems. Do you remember my experience in San Francisco? Bud asked. Yeah. Remember the problems I had there? How I wasn't engaged, wasn't committed, and I was making things more difficult for others? Yeah, I remember. Bud erased everything that had been written next to the self-betrayal diagram. Then he wrote the following. Lack of commitment, lack of engagement, troublemaking. Okay, here are a few of the problems I had in San Francisco, he said as he stepped back from the board. My symptoms, as it were. But let's add as many kinds of problems to this list as we can. What are some other common people problems in organizations? Conflict, I said. Lack of motivation. Stress, Kate added. Poor teamwork, I said. Hold on a minute, said Bud, writing furiously. I'm trying to get 'em all up here. Okay, go ahead. What else? Backbiting, alignment problems, lack of trust, Kate said. Lack of accountability, I offered. Bad attitudes, communication problems. Okay, good, Bud said, finishing the last few. That's a good enough list. Now let's take a look and compare it with the story right over here where I failed to get up and tend to my child. Bud's self-betrayal diagram, which included how he saw both himself and Nancy when he was in the box, was now side by side with the list of the following words: lack of commitment, lack of engagement, troublemaking, conflict, lack of motivating, stress, poor teamwork, backbiting, bad attitudes, misalignment, lack of trust, lack of accountability, and communication problems. Notice, did I have a commitment or engagement problem after I betrayed myself? Yes, I answered. But how about before? Did I have a commitment or engagement problem when I just had the feeling to get up and tend to David so that Nancy could sleep? No, I said. How about making things more difficult for others? Was I making things more difficult for Nancy when I just had the feeling to help her? No, I answered. Only after you betrayed yourself. That's right. And how about conflict and stress? When do you suppose I was more stressed? When I just felt I should help Nancy, or after I betrayed myself and was inflating the importance of the things I had to do the next morning? Oh, after you betrayed yourself, for sure. Same with conflict. You weren't in conflict with Nancy before you betrayed yourself, only after. That's right, Bud agreed. You can go down all these people problems, and what you find is that they all existed after I betrayed myself, but not before. Bud paused, giving me a chance to look at the list and see for myself. Then he asked, "Which means what?" "I'm not sure I know what you mean." "Well, I had all of these people problems after I betrayed myself, but not before." "Which means what?" "Which means... Oh, which means that they were caused by your self-betrayal," I finally said. "Exactly, Tom. I didn't have those problems before I betrayed myself, only after. So the solution to the self-betrayal problem is the solution to all of those people problems." Bud paused again, giving me time to digest the idea. Then he continued. "Remember how I said that, like Semmelweis's medical discovery, the solution to the self-deception problem amounts to a sort of unifying theory, a theory that shows that the various disparate problems we call people problems really have all the same cause?" "Yeah, I remember." "Well, here's what I meant, right here," he said, pointing to the diagram. "This simple story shows how it happens. Self-betrayal is the germ that creates the disease of self-deception. And like childbed fever, self-deception has many different symptoms, from lack of motivation and commitment to stress and communication problems. Organizations die or are severely crippled by those symptoms. And that happens because those who carry the germ don't know they're carrying it." I thought about the import of that for a moment, studying the diagram. But is it always the same in business? I mean, after all, your example is about failing to get up to tend to a baby. That's not what's happening at work. "That's true," he said. "You're right, that the people at work aren't betraying themselves quite this way. No one is failing to tend to a baby. However, a lot of people are failing to do things for co-workers that they feel they should do, and they feel justified every time that happens, just like in this example. Every time we betray ourselves, we go into the box, and it doesn't matter whether we betray ourselves at home, at work, at the store, or wherever. The box, self-deception, will itself cause all the same kinds of problems in every one of those situations that it caused in this one." "But there's something else," he continued. "There's a particular self-betrayal that almost everyone engages in at work to one degree or another, a self-betrayal concerning the very purpose of what we were hired to do, to focus on helping the organization and its people to achieve results. The key to solving most of the people problems that afflict organizations is in discovering how we can solve this central workplace self-betrayal." "So how do you?" I asked eagerly. But we're not quite ready to understand that yet. We have a few more ideas to consider first, but maybe we should take a break before we get to it." Kate glanced at her watch. "I'm afraid I'm going to have to leave, guys. I have a 4:30 with Howard Chen. I wish I didn't have to." "Tom," she said, rising from her chair and extending her hand to me, "it's been a real pleasure spending this time with you. I appreciate how seriously you're taking this. As I said before, there's nothing more important to us around here than what you are now learning. It's Zagram's #1 strategic initiative. You'll understand what that means as you get into what comes next." "What do you think?" she said, turning to Bud. "You going to try to finish up the basics tonight?" "If so, we'll be going a little late. Tom and I will have to talk about it." "Sounds good," Kate said as she started for the door. "By the way, Tom," she said, turning back to me, "I left Zagram once. It was a very different company then." "Why did you leave?" I asked. "Because of Lou Herbert." That wasn't the answer I expected. "Really? I thought you and Lou were really tight." "Not in the early days. Lou wasn't tight with anybody back then. A lot of good people left." "Then why'd you come back?" "Because of Lou," she said. I was confused. "What do you mean?" "Lou found this material, the material you're learning now, and it transformed him. And in transforming him, it transformed the company. When he came to see me, he came to apologize, and he came with a plan. I've worked for Zagram twice, but it might as well have been two different companies. You're learning about the need to apologize, like Lou, and you'll soon learn about the plan that follows from it. As I told you before, everything we do here is built on what you're learning. It's what makes this place tick." She paused. "We're glad you're part of the team, Tom. You wouldn't be here unless we believed in you." "Thanks," I replied. "And thank you, Bud," she said, turning in his direction. "You never cease to amaze me." "What are you talking about?" he asked, chuckling. "I'm talking about what you mean to the company and the people in it. You're just like Lou became after he got his act together. You're Zagram's secret weapon." Kate smiled and headed toward the door. "Anyway, thanks," she said as she walked out. "And keep rooting for the Cardinals, both of you. Yes, even you, Bud," she said, responding to his frown. "Heaven knows they need the help." "Wow," I said to no one in particular after Kate left. "I can't believe she took all that time to be with me today." "Believe me," said Bud, "you don't know the half of it. She has tremendous demands on her time, but she comes whenever she can. And she comes because what we're now embarked on produces more results for this company than any other single thing we do. Her attendance is her way of saying, we're serious about this, and if you aren't, you won't stay long." Bud patted me on the back. "It's the same thing for me, Tom. People who persist in being in the box don't make it here. And that's no less true of me than it is of you. We're in this together." He chuckled reassuringly. All I could think of, however, was Todd and Laura. "Well, Tom," he said, signaling a change in topic, "we have a decision to make. We have a few more hours to go before we're through with the basics, and we can either finish tonight or meet again tomorrow, if that's possible for you." I thought about my schedule. I had a full afternoon, but I could clear my morning schedule. "I think I'd prefer tomorrow morning." "Good enough. Let's say 8 a.m., and if I can arrange it, I might even have a surprise for you." "A surprise?" "Yeah, if we're lucky." The warm August wind blew through my hair as I turned my convertible from Long Ridge Road east onto Merritt Parkway. I had a wife and son who needed some attention, perhaps even some apologies. I hardly knew where to begin. But I knew that Todd liked working on cars, an interest I had ridiculed whenever I could, out of fear that Tom Callum's boy would grow up to be a mechanic. I also knew that Laura hadn't had a meal prepared for her in months. I had decided to pick up items for a barbecue, and I was feeling the desire to learn a thing or two about tuning engines. For the first time in years, I was in a hurry to get home. Part 3. How we get out of the box. Chapter 17. Lou. It was 8:15 a.m., and Bud wasn't in the conference room yet. I was starting to wonder if I'd heard him correctly when the doors burst open and into the room walked an elderly gentleman. "Tom McCallum?" he said with a hearty smile, extending his hand. "Yes." "Glad to meet you. My name's Lou Herbert." "Lou Herbert?" I said in astonishment. I'd seen pictures of Lou in some old video, but his presence was so unexpected that I never would have recognized him without his introduction. "Yeah, sorry for the shock. Bud's on his way. He's just checking on a couple of things for a meeting we have this afternoon." I was dumbstruck. No words came to mind, so I just stood there nervously. "You're probably wondering what I'm doing here," he said. "Well, yes, as a matter of fact. Bud called me last night and asked if I could join you guys this morning. He wanted me to explain a few things about my history here. I was coming over today anyway for this afternoon's meeting, so here I am." "I don't know what to say. It's incredible to meet you. I've heard so much about you." "I know. It's almost like I'm already dead, isn't it?" he said with a grin. "Yeah, I guess it kind of is," I said, chuckling, before I knew what I was saying. Look, Tom, go ahead, sit. Bud asked me to get started with you before he arrives. He gestured toward a seat. Please. I sat in my familiar chair from the afternoon before, and Lou took the seat across from me. So how's it been going? You mean yesterday? Yes. It was quite an amazing day, actually. Quite amazing. Really? Tell me about it, he said. Although I'd been with Lou for only a minute or two, my nervousness had evaporated. His kindly eyes and gentle demeanor reminded me of my dad, who had died 10 years earlier. I felt completely comfortable in his presence and found myself wanting to share my thoughts with him, as I used to with my father. Well, I said, I hardly know where to begin. I learned a lot yesterday. But let me start with my boy. Over the next 15 minutes or so, I told Lou about the best night I'd had with Laura and Todd in at least 5 years. It was a night that was extraordinary only because I simply enjoyed being with them, without anything extraordinary happening to make me enjoy it. I cooked, I laughed, I had my son teach me how to tune up the car. For the first time in I don't know how long, I enjoyed and felt grateful for my family. And for the first time in a long time, I went to bed with no hard feelings toward anyone in my home. What did Laura think of it all? Lou asked. I don't think she knew what to think. She kept asking me what was going on, until I finally had to tell her about what I learned yesterday. Oh, so you tried to teach her? Yeah, and it was a disaster. I think it took me only a minute or so to have her thoroughly confused. The box, self-betrayal, collusion, I butchered the ideas so badly I couldn't believe it. Lou smiled knowingly. I know what you mean. You hear someone like Bud explain all this, and it seems like the simplest thing in the world. But try to do it yourself, and you quickly realize how subtle it all is. That's true. I think my explanations probably created more questions than they answered, but she tried to understand anyway. Lou listened intently, his eyes creased with kindness. Although I couldn't be sure, I thought I saw approval in them as well. You might check with Bud to see if this is still going on, Lou said. But in the past, a couple of times a year, we put on evening-long training events where interested family members could come and learn these ideas. It used to mean a lot to everybody that the company would do that for them. If it's still going on, Laura might really like it. Thanks, I'll check, for sure. Just then the doors swung open, and in walked Bud. Tom, he said, exasperated. Sorry I'm late. Had a few last-minute preparations for the meeting with the Kloffhausen group this afternoon. As usual, there aren't enough last minutes. He set his briefcase down and took the seat between Lou and me at the head of the table. Well, Tom, we got lucky. What do you mean? I mean Lou. He's the surprise I was hoping for. Lou's story is the story of how this material has transformed Zagrum, and I wanted him to share it with you if he could. I'm happy I can be here, Lou said graciously. But before we get into that story, Bud, I think you should hear about Tom's experience last night. Oh, yeah, Tom, I'm sorry. Tell me about your evening. I don't know why, perhaps because I worked for Bud and wanted badly to impress him, but I was reticent at first to share what I'd shared with Lou. But Lou kept prodding me. Tell him about this and tell him about that. And I soon relaxed and told Bud all about my evening. After 10 minutes or so, he was smiling, just as Lou had been. Well, that's terrific, Tom, Bud said. How was Todd through the evening? About the same as usual, pretty silent. He basically responded to my questions as he always does, mostly with yes, no, and I don't know. But I didn't seem to mind it last night, whereas before it would have driven me crazy. That reminds me of my boy, Lou said. He paused for a moment, looking out the window, far away, as if retrieving something from the distant past. The story of Zagrum's turnaround starts with him. Chapter 18. Leadership in the Box. My youngest boy, Corey, who's now almost 40, was a handful. Drugs, drinking, you name it, he did it. Everything came to a head when he was arrested for selling drugs during his senior year in high school. At first I wanted to deny it. No, Herbert ever did drugs. And to sell them, that was unthinkable. I stomped around demanding that this injustice be exposed. It couldn't be true, not about my boy. So I demanded a full trial. Our lawyer recommended against it, and the district attorney offered a plea bargain that included only 30 days in jail. But I wouldn't have it. I'll be damned if my son's ever going to jail, I said, and so we fought. But we lost, and Corey ended up spending a full year in the youth detention facility up in Bridgeport. As far as I was concerned, it was a blight on the family name. I visited him twice the whole year. When he got home, we hardly spoke. I rarely asked him anything, and when I did, he responded with barely audible one-word answers. He fell back into the wrong crowd, and within 3 months he was arrested again for shoplifting. I wanted to deal with this one quietly. I had no illusions that he was innocent. So I pushed for a plea bargain that involved a 60-day wilderness treatment and survival program in the high country of Arizona. 5 days later, I boarded a plane, Corey in tow, from JFK to Phoenix. I was taking him to be fixed. My wife Carol and I dropped him off at the organization's headquarters. We watched as he was loaded into a van with other kids who were entering the program, and away they drove toward the mountains of eastern central Arizona. We were then escorted into a room for 2 all-day sessions where I expected to learn how the people there were going to fix my son. But that's not what I learned. I learned that whatever my son's problems might be, I needed fixing too. What I learned changed my life. Not at first, for I fought everything they were suggesting, tooth and nail. What, me? I protested. I don't do drugs. I'm not the one who spent most of my senior year in high school behind bars. I'm not the thief. I'm a responsible person, respected, the president of a company even. But gradually I came to see the lie in my defensiveness. I came to discover, in a way I can describe only as simultaneously painful and hopeful, that I had been, for years, in the box toward my wife and my kids. In the box? I said quietly, almost under my breath. Yes, in the box, Lou responded. I learned that first day in Arizona what you learned yesterday. And in that moment, about the time when my son was probably climbing out of the van and looking around at the isolated wilderness that would be his home for the next 2 months, I felt for the first time in years an overwhelming desire to take him in my arms and hold him. What desperate loneliness and shame he must have been feeling, and how I added to it. His last hours, or for that matter months and maybe even years, with his dad, had been spent under a silent cloud of blame. It was all I could do to hold back the tears. But it was worse than that. That day I realized that my box had driven away not only my son, but also the most important people in my company. 2 weeks earlier, in what people around the company were calling the March meltdown, 5 of the 6 executive team members had left for better opportunities. Kate? I asked. Yes, Kate was one of them. Lou stared intently into nowhere, apparently in deep thought. It's amazing when I think back on it now, he said finally. I felt betrayed by them the same way I felt betrayed by Corey. To hell with them, I told myself. To hell with them all. I was determined, he continued, to build Zagram into a success without them. They weren't that great anyway, I told myself. They'd been around, most of them, for the full 6 years or so since I'd purchased the company from John Zagram, and the company was basically limping along. If they were any good, we'd be doing better by now, I thought. To hell with them. But it was a lie. Now, it might have been true that we should have been doing better, But it was still a lie, because I was completely blind to my own role in our mediocrity. And as a result, I was blind to how I was blaming them not for their mistakes, but for mine. I was blind, as we always are, to my own box. But I recovered my sight in Arizona. I saw in myself a leader who was so sure of the brilliance of his own ideas that he couldn't allow brilliance in anyone else's. A leader who felt he was so enlightened that he needed to see workers negatively in order to prove his enlightenment. A leader so driven to be the best that he made sure no one else could be as good as he was. Lou paused. You've learned about collusion, haven't you, Tom? When two or more people are mutually in their boxes toward each other? Yeah. Well, with justifying images that told me I was brilliant, enlightened, and the best, you can imagine the collusions I was provoking around here. In the box, I was a walking excuse factory, both for myself and for others. Any workers who needed the slightest justification for their own betrayals had a smorgasbord of options in me. I couldn't see, for example, that the more I took responsibility for my team's performance, the more mistrusted they felt. They then resisted in all kinds of ways. Some just gave up and left all creativity to me. Others defied me and did things their own way. And still others left the company altogether. All of these responses convinced me all the more of the incompetence of the people in the company, so I responded by issuing even more careful instructions, developing even more policies and procedures, and so on. Everyone took all that to be further evidence of my disrespect for them, and resisted me all the more, and so on, round and round, each of us inviting the other to be in the box, and in so doing provided each other with mutual justification for staying there. Collusion was everywhere. We were a mess. Just like Semmelweis, I said in amazement under my breath. Oh, so Bud told you about Semmelweis? Lou asked, looking at Bud and then back at me. Yes, I said, nodding along with Bud. Well, that's right, Lou continued. The Semmelweis story is an interesting parallel. I was, in effect, killing the people in my company. Our turnover rate rivaled the mortality rate at Vienna General. I was carrying the disease I blamed everyone else for. I infected them and then blamed them for their infection. Our organization chart was a chart of colluding boxes. As I said, we were a mess. But what I learned in Arizona was that I was a mess. Because I was in the box, I was provoking the very problems I was complaining about. I had chased away the very best people I knew, feeling justified all the time, because in my box I was convinced they weren't that good. He paused. Even Kate, he added, shaking his head. No one on this planet is any more talented than Kate, but I couldn't see it because of my box. So, as I sat there in Arizona, I had a huge problem. I was sitting next to a wife whom I'd taken for granted for 25 years. I was by then 100 miles of impassable terrain away from a son whose only recent memories of his father were probably bitter ones. And my company had come unglued, the best and brightest scattering around the globe, embarking on new careers. I was a lonely man. My box was destroying everything I cared about. One question seemed more important to me in that moment than anything else in the world. How can I possibly get out of the box? Lou paused, and I waited for him to continue. So how do you? I finally interjected. How do you get out of the box? You already know. Chapter 19. Toward being out of the box. I do? I searched my memory about the sessions the day before. I was sure we hadn't talked about it. Yes, and so did I when I was wondering how to get out, Lou said. Huh? At that moment I was really lost. Think about it, Lou replied. As I sat there regretting how I'd acted toward my wife, my son, and my co-workers, what were they to me? In that moment, was I seeing them as people or as objects? In that moment, they were people to you, I said, my voice trailing off in thought. Yes, my blame, resentment, and indifference were gone. I was seeing them as they were, and I was regretting having treated them as less than that. So in that moment, where was I? You were out of the box, I said softly, almost as if in a trance, trying to locate what had made the change possible. I was feeling a bit like a spectator at a magic show who sees the rabbit sure enough, but has no idea where it came from. Exactly, Lou agreed. In the moment I felt the keen desire to be out of the box for them, I was already out of the box toward them. To feel that desire for them was to be out of the box toward them. And the same goes for you, Tom, he continued. Think about your time last night with your family. What were they to you last night? Were you seeing them as people or as objects? They were people, I said, amazed by the discovery. So if last night you were out of the box, Lou said, then you already know how to get out of the box. But I don't, I said in protest. I have no idea how it happened. In fact, I didn't even know I was out of the box last night until you just pointed it out to me. I couldn't begin to tell you how I got out. Yes, you can. In fact, you already did. What do you mean? I was completely bewildered. I mean, you told us about yesterday and about your experience last night and about how you went home and spent the evening with your family. That story teaches us how to get out of the box. But that's my point. I don't see it. And this is my point. Yes, you do. You just don't realize it yet. But you will. That gave me a little bit of comfort, but not much. You see, Lou said, the question, how do I get out of the box, is really two questions. The first question is, how do I get out? And the second is, how do I stay out once I'm out? The question you're really worried about, I think, is the second, how you stay out. Think about it, and I want to emphasize this again. When you're feeling that you want to be out of the box for someone, in that moment, you're already out. You're feeling that way because you're now seeing him or her as a person. In feeling that way toward another person, you're already out of the box. So in that moment, like the moment you're having right now and like last night, when you're seeing and feeling clearly and want to be out of the box for others, what you're really asking is this: what can I do to stay out of the box toward them? What can I do to sustain the change I'm now feeling? That's the question. And there are some pretty specific things we can do once we're out of the box to stay out of the box, and particularly for our purposes in the workplace. As Lou was talking, I started to understand what he meant. Okay, I see how in feeling like I want to be out of the box for someone, in that moment I'm seeing him or her as a person. So in having that feeling, I'm already out of the box toward that person. I understand that. And I understand how once I'm out of the box, the question then is how to stay out. And I definitely want to get into that, especially applied to work. But I'm still scratching my head over how I got out in the first place, how my resentment toward Laura and Todd suddenly disappeared. Maybe I just got lucky last night. When I'm not so lucky, I'd like to know how to get myself out. Fair enough, Lou said, standing up. I'll do my best, with Bud's help, to explain how we get out in the first place. Chapter 20. Dead Ends. To begin with, Lou continued, it helps to understand how we don't get out of the box. He wrote on the board, "What doesn't work in the box?" Turning back to me, he said, Think about the things we try to do when we're in the box. For example, in the box, whom do we think has the problem? Others, I answered. That's right, he said. So normally we spend a lot of energy in the box trying to change others. But does that work? Does that get us out of the box? No. Why not? He asked. Because that's the problem in the first place, I said. I'm trying to change them because, in the box, I think they need to be changed. But does that mean that no one needs to be changed? Lou asked. Is everyone doing things just perfectly then? Is that what you're saying? That no one needs to improve? I felt a little stupid when he asked the question. Come on, Callum, I said to myself. Think. I wasn't being careful enough. No, of course not. Everyone needs to improve. Then why not the other guy? He said. What's wrong if I want him to improve? That was a good question. What was wrong with that? I asked myself. I thought that was what all this meant, but at that moment I wasn't so certain. I'm not sure, I said. Well, think about it this way. While it's true that others may have problems they need to solve, are their problems the reason I'm in the box? No, that's what you think in the box, but it's a misperception. Exactly, said Lou. So even if I were successful and the person I tried to change actually changed, would that solve the problem of my being in the box? No, I guess it wouldn't. That's right, it wouldn't, even if the other person actually did change. And what's worse than that, Bud interjected. Think about what we talked about yesterday regarding collusion. When I'm in the box and try to get others to change, do I invite them to change as I'd like? No, I said. You end up provoking just the opposite. Exactly right, Bud said. My box ends up provoking more of the very thing I set out to change. So if I try to get out by changing others, I end up provoking others to give me reason to stay in the box. So, Lou said, turning to the board and writing, trying to change others doesn't work. What doesn't work in the box? Number 1, trying to change others. What about doing my best to cope with others? Lou said, turning from the board. Does that work? I wouldn't think so, I said. That's essentially what I usually do, but it doesn't seem to get me out. That's right, it doesn't, Lou agreed. And there's a simple reason why. Coping has the same deficiency as trying to change the other person. It's just another way to continue blaming. It communicates the blame of my box, which invites those I'm coping with to be in their boxes. He turned to the board and added coping to the list of things that didn't work. What doesn't work in the box? Trying to change others. Number 2, doing my best to cope with others. How about this one? Bud added while Lou was writing. Leaving. Does leaving work? Will that get me out of the box? Maybe, I said. Seems like it might sometimes. Well, let's think about it. Where do I think the problem is when I'm in the box? In others, I said. Exactly. But where in fact is the problem when I'm in the box? In myself. Yes. So if I leave, what goes with me? He asked. The problem? I said, softly nodding. Yeah, I get it. The box goes with me. That's right, Bud said. In the box, leaving is just another way to blame. It's just a continuation of my box. I take my self-justifying feelings with me. Now, it may be that in certain situations, leaving is the right thing to do. But leaving a situation will never be sufficient, even if right. Ultimately, I have to leave my box, too. Yeah, that makes sense, I said. Here, let me add that to the list, Lou said. What doesn't work in the box? Trying to change others. Doing my best to cope with others. And number 3, leaving. Here's another one to consider, said Lou. How about communicating? Will that work? Will that get me out of the box? It seems like it would, I said. I mean, if you can't communicate, you don't have anything. Okay, said Lou. Let's consider this one carefully. He looked at the board. Whose story is this over here about self-betrayal? Is it yours, Bud? Yes, Bud nodded. Oh, yeah, I see Nancy's name there, said Lou. Okay, let's think about it. Look here, Tom, at Bud's story. After he betrayed himself, here's how he saw Nancy. As lazy, inconsiderate, insensitive, and so on. Now here's the question. If he tries to communicate with Nancy now, while he's in his box, what's he going to communicate? Oh, I said, surprised by the implication. He's going to communicate what he's feeling about her, namely that she's all those bad things. Exactly. And will that help? Is Bud likely to get out of the box by telling his wife that she's all the lousy things he's thinking she is when he's in the box? No, I said. But what if he's a little more sophisticated than that? I mean, with a little skill, he might be able to communicate more subtly and not just come out and blast away. That's true, Lou agreed. But remember, if Bud's in the box, then he's blaming. It's true he may be able to acquire some skills that would improve his communication techniques, but do you suppose those skills would hide his blame? Probably not, I said, at least not completely. That's the way it seems to me, too, agreed Lou. In the box, whether I'm a skilled communicator or not, I end up communicating my box, and that's the problem. He turned and added, communicating to the list. What doesn't work in the box? Trying to change others, doing my best to cope with others, leaving, and number 4, communicating. In fact, he said, backing away from the board, this point about skills applies to skills generally, not just communication skills. You might think about it this way. No matter what skill you teach me, I can be either in the box or out of the box when I implement it. And that raises this question. Will using a skill in the box be the way to get out of the box? No, I said. I guess not. That's why skill training in non-technical areas often has so little lasting impact, Lou said. Helpful skills and techniques aren't very helpful if they're done in the box. They just provide people with more sophisticated ways to blame. And remember, Tom, added Bud, the people problems that most people try to correct with skills aren't due to a lack of skill at all. They're due to self-betrayal. People problems seem intractable not because they're insoluble, but because the common skill interventions are not themselves solutions. That's exactly right, agreed Lou. So, he said, turning and writing again, we can't get out of the box simply by implementing new skills and techniques. What doesn't work in the box? Trying to change others, doing my best to cope with others, leaving, communicating, and 5, implementing new skills or techniques. I looked at the board and suddenly felt depressed. What's left? I thought. There's one more possibility we should consider, said Bud. Here it is. What if I try to change myself, my behavior? Can that get me out of the box? It looks like the only thing that can get you out, I answered. This is tricky, but quite important. Bud stood up and started to pace. Let's think back to a couple of the stories we talked about yesterday. Remember the situation I told you about Gabe and Leon over in Building 6? I searched my memory. I'm not sure. Gabe had tried doing all kinds of things to let Leon know he was concerned about him. Oh, yeah, I remember. Well, he continued, Gabe had changed his behavior toward Leon dramatically. But did that work? No. And why not? Because, as I recall, Gabe didn't really care about Leon. And that's what Leon understood, despite all of Gabe's outward changes. Exactly. Since Gabe was in the box toward Leon, every new thing Gabe tried to do from within his box just amounted to a change within the box. Leon remained an object to him throughout all his efforts. Think about that, Bud said with emphasis. Or think about the story where Nancy and I were arguing, but I tried to apologize and put an end to it. Do you remember? I nodded. Yeah. It's the same thing, he said, taking his seat. I changed myself in a radical way in that case. I changed all the way from arguing to kissing. But did that change get me out of the box? No, because you really didn't mean it, I answered. You were still in the box. And that's just the point, Bud said, leaning toward me. Because I was in the box, I couldn't mean it. In the box, every change I can think of is just a change in my style of being in the box. I can change from arguing to kissing. I can change from ignoring someone to going out of my way to shower that person with attention. But whatever changes I think of in the box are changes I think of from within the box. And they're therefore just more of the box, which is the problem in the first place. Others remain objects to me. That's right, Lou said, moving toward the board. So consider the implication, Tom. I can't get out of the box merely by changing my behavior. What doesn't work in the box? Trying to change others, doing my best to cope with others, leaving, communicating, implementing new skills or techniques, or number 6, changing my behavior. But wait a minute, I said. You're telling me that I can't get out by trying to change others, or by doing my best to cope with others, or by leaving, communicating, or implementing new skills and techniques, and then you're telling me on top of that I can't even get out of the box by changing myself? Well, you can't get out by continuing to focus on yourself, which is what you do when you're trying to change your behavior in the box. So yeah, that is what we're saying, he answered calmly. Then how could we ever get out? I mean, if what you're saying is right, then there's no way out. We're all stuck. Actually, Lou said, that's not quite right. There is a way out, but it's different than anyone generally supposes. And you know what it is, just like I told you before. You just don't realize that you know it. I was listening intently. I wanted to understand this. You were out of the box last night toward your family, right? I guess so. Well, by the way you told your story, it sounded like you were, Lou said. That means there is a way out. So let's think of your experience last night. Did you try to change your wife and son last night? No. Did you feel like you were coping with them? No. And obviously you didn't leave. How about communicating? Did you get out because you communicated? Well, maybe. I mean, we communicated very well, the best we'd done in a long time. Yes, Lou agreed. But did you get out of the box because you communicated, or did you communicate well because you were out of the box? Let me think, I said, more puzzled than ever. I guess I was already out of the box. Yeah, I was out of the box on my way home. Communicating isn't what got me out, I guess. Okay, then how about this last one? Lou said, pointing at the list. Did you get out of the box because you focused on and tried to change yourself? I sat there wondering, what happened to me yesterday? It ended in a magnificent evening, but I suddenly had no idea how I'd gotten there. It was like I'd been abducted by aliens. Did I set out to change myself? That wasn't my memory. It felt more like something changed me. At least I couldn't remember setting out to change. In fact, if anything, it seemed that along the whole way I resisted the suggestion that I had to change. So what happened? How did I get out of the box? Why did my feelings change? I'm not sure, I said finally, but I don't remember trying to change myself. Somehow I just ended up changed, almost like something changed me, but I'm clueless as to how it happened. Well, here's something that might help you figure it out, Bud said. Remember when we talked yesterday about how the distinction between being in the box and being out of the box is deeper than behavior? Yeah, I remember that, I said. And we discussed the airplane seating story, drew that diagram with behaviors up on the top, and talked about how we can do almost any behavior in one of those two ways, either out of the box or in the box. Remember? Yes,